The silence in the Galactic Council chamber was absolute. 500 species, each represented by their finest diplomats and leaders, sat motionless as the transmission played across the central holographic display. The message came from Velar Prime, a world that had been peaceful and prosperous just 3 weeks ago. The face on the screen belonged to a Valaxi elder named Morin. His species looked like bears from Earth, but larger, with silver-blue fur and eyes that held a depth of wisdom humanity was only beginning to understand. Morin's breathing was labored, his massive form slumped against a wall covered in the bright murals that Valaxi loved to paint. "To the Council," Morin said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We are dying. The stellar plague came without warning. It attacks only the adults. Our doctors cannot stop it. Our scientists have no cure. In 2 days, maybe 3, every Valaxi over the age of 15 cycles will be gone." Captain Jiwan Park sat in the human delegation section, her hands gripping the armrests of her chair. She was the youngest captain in the human fleet. Only 32 years old, but she had seen enough in her years of space travel to know tragedy when it appeared. This was worse than tragedy. This was extinction. "Our cubs," Morin continued, and now his voice cracked with emotion. 40,000 cubs across our colony worlds. They are healthy. The plague does not touch them. But they are young. The oldest is only 14 cycles. They cannot survive alone. We have activated care systems, automated feeders, environmental controls. But these are children. They need more than food and air. They need family." The elder coughed, a deep rattling sound that made Jiwan wince. "We ask the Council for help. Please take our children. Raise them. Teach them about us, about their people, their history. Do not let our species end with us. Let it continue in them." The transmission flickered and died. The chamber remained silent for a long moment. Before the Council speaker, a tall crystalline being named Orthax activated his podium. "The request has been heard," Orthax said, his voice resonating through translation devices. "We will now discuss possible responses." What followed was 3 hours of debate that made Jiwan's blood boil. Species after species stood and explained why they could not help. The Krell had water-based biology and the cubs would drown. The Manthar breathed methane and the cubs needed oxygen. The Threen had body temperatures that would burn the cubs on contact. On and on it went, each species presenting perfectly logical reasons why intervention was impossible. Dr. Hyun-Woo Kim, who sat beside Jiwan, leaned close and whispered, "They are not even trying." "They are looking for excuses," Jiwan nodded. Hyun-Woo was right. The Council had protocols for everything, vast resources, technology that seemed like magic to human eyes. But they also had the non-interference protocol, a law that said no species could adopt the young of another without proving biological compatibility. It was meant to prevent exploitation, but now it was becoming a death sentence. "The children will die," said Counselor Vrennet, a reptilian being whose species controlled 3 star systems. "This is unfortunate, but nature is often cruel. We cannot risk our own resources and peoples on an experiment that will likely fail. The Valaxi cubs require specific care that none of us can provide. We should let them pass peacefully." "No," Jiwan said. She did not shout, but her voice carried across the chamber. 500 faces turned toward the human section. Jiwan stood, her heart pounding. "Humanity volunteers." Orthax tilted his crystalline head. "Captain Park, humanity has been part of this council for only 5 years. You do not have the experience or resources for such an undertaking." "Maybe not," Jiwan said. "But we have the will, and we have biology that might work. Send us the Valaxi biological data. Let our doctors study it. Give us a chance." The chamber erupted in discussion. Several species laughed outright. Others looked at the humans with something between pity and confusion. Humans were known in the galaxy as the species that felt too much, that formed emotional connections too easily, that cried at sunsets and wrote poetry about strangers. They were seen as soft. Hyun-Woo stood beside Jiwan. "We have already begun preliminary analysis based on available data. Valaxi biology is carbon-based, oxygen-breathing. With protein requirements we can likely meet. Their young are omnivorous and adaptable. It is possible. Possible is not certain," Vrennet said. "And when you fail, when these cubs die under human care, it will be your responsibility." "We accept that," Jiwan said firmly. The vote took another hour. In the end, the Council agreed to let humanity try, but they imposed conditions. Humans would have 6 months to prove they could care for the cubs. Any signs of failure and the council would intervene, which everyone understood meant euthanasia. The cubs would be considered wards of humanity, but with constant council oversight. As the session ended, Mina Choi, the chief engineer of the human relief vessel called Covenant, approached Ji-won. "Captain, we are really doing this?" "Yes," Ji-won said, watching the council members file out of the chamber. Many of them were already dismissing the human effort as a doomed gesture. "Get the Covenant ready. Maximum capacity. We leave in 12 hours. That is not much time. Those cubs do not have much time either. The Covenant was not a military vessel. It was designed for disaster relief, with medical bays, living quarters, and cargo holds that could be converted for various purposes. But it had never been meant to carry 40,000 alien children. The crew worked through the night, pulling in volunteers from Earth and the nearby colonies. By the time the ship jumped to hyperspace, over 300 humans were aboard, most of them with no experience in xenobiology or alien cultures. They were teachers, doctors, engineers, farmers, artists, and parents. They came because when they saw the transmission from Morin, when they saw a dying elder begging someone to save his children, they could not say no. As the Covenant traveled toward Velar Prime, Ji-won stood in her ready room looking at files on the Valaxi. They were a peaceful species, had never waged war, loved music and art, raised their young in communal groups where every adult was responsible for every child. Their planet was beautiful, covered in forests and crystal-clear lakes. In 3 days, every adult Valaxi would be dead. Hyunwoo entered without knocking, holding a data pad. "Captain, I have good news and bad news. Tell me both." "Good news is that Valaxi cubs can eat modified human food. We can keep them fed. Bad news is that they are highly empathic. They feel emotions from those around them. When their parents died, they felt it all. The trauma will be severe." Ji-won closed her eyes. "So they are not just orphaned. They are emotionally wounded. Yes? Can we help them?" Hyunwoo was quiet for a moment. "I do not know. But we must try." The Covenant dropped out of hyperspace near Velar Prime 2 days later. The planet below was silent. No traffic, no communications, no signs of life except for the automated distress beacons. And somewhere down there, 40,000 cubs waited in the dark, wondering why their parents had not come back. The first facility they found was on the northern continent of Velar Prime, built into the side of a mountain overlooking a valley filled with purple flowering trees. It was designed to care for 300 cubs, and according to the automated systems, 247 were still alive inside. Ji-won led the first team down. They wore environmental suits not because the air was dangerous, but because they did not know how the cubs would react to human scent. Hyunwoo walked beside her, carrying medical scanners and supplies. Behind them came Dae-hyun Lee, a child psychologist who had volunteered the moment he heard about the mission. The facility doors opened with a soft hiss. Inside, the lights were dim, set to the day-night cycle the Valaxi preferred. The walls were painted with murals of forests and families, bright colors that now seemed sad in the empty corridors. They followed the sound of whimpering to a large common room. The cubs huddled together in groups piled on top of each other for warmth and comfort. They ranged in age from infants barely able to walk to adolescents nearly as large as adult humans. Their fur was matted, their eyes dull. When the humans entered, several cubs looked up, but most did not react at all. "They are in shock," Dae-hyun said quietly. "Emotional shutdown. They felt their parents die and now they are just waiting." Ji-won removed her helmet slowly, letting the cubs see her face. She knelt down several meters away from the nearest group and spoke softly. "Hello, my name is Ji-won. We are humans. We came to help you." One cub, slightly larger than the others, lifted its head. Its eyes were golden like honey in sunlight. It made a sound, something between a growl and a whimper. Hyunwoo's translator device clicked and processed. "Mama?" the cub said, "and Papa?" Ji-won felt tears sting her eyes, but she kept her voice steady. "No, little one. I am sorry. Your Mama and Papa cannot come, but we will take care of you. We promise." The cub stared at her for a long moment, then slowly stood and walked toward her. It was cautious, testing each step. When it reached Ji-won, it pressed its face against her chest and began to cry. The sound was heartbreaking, a deep sobbing that shook the cub's entire body. Ji-won wrapped her arms around the cub and held tight. I know, I know. I am here, the other cubs watched. Then one by one they began to move toward the humans. Within minutes, every person on the team was surrounded by crying, traumatized cubs who desperately needed to be held. That scene repeated across 40 different facilities on 3 different worlds. Over the next 2 weeks, the Covenant and 6 other human ships worked non-stop to evacuate every surviving cub. The final count was 38,000, 2,000 fewer than initial reports. Those 2,000 had not survived the waiting. Each loss hit the human teams hard. They had come to save every cub, and every empty bed felt like failure. But there was no time to grieve. The living cubs needed constant care. Soman Han, an agricultural specialist, worked 18-hour days developing food that the cubs could eat. Galaxy biology required complex proteins that were similar to what Earth predators needed, but with specific amino acid chains that human replicators struggled to produce. Soman eventually created a mixture using modified soy, insect proteins, and synthesized compounds that the cubs could digest. The first feeding was tense. The cubs had been surviving on automated nutrient paste that kept them alive, but left them weak and listless. When Soman offered her new formula, disguised in small cakes that looked like traditional Galaxy snacks, several cubs refused to eat. It was Mina who solved the problem. She sat with a group of younger cubs and started singing. It was a simple lullaby from Earth, nothing special, just a song her mother had sung to her. The cubs stopped whimpering and listened. One reached for the food cake while watching Mina. It took a small bite, then another, then devoured the entire thing. They need comfort with their food, Mina realized. Galaxy parents sang while feeding their young. They need that connection. After that, every meal included singing or storytelling. Human volunteers learned dozens of Earth songs and created new ones. They told stories about brave heroes and kind families, about lost children who found their way home. The cubs began to eat more, to gain weight, to show signs of life beyond mere survival. But there were failures too. 3 cubs died in the first month, despite every effort. One simply gave up, refusing to eat or drink, staring at the walls until its heart stopped. The other 2 had underlying health conditions that Galaxy medicine could have treated, but human doctors did not understand in time. Each death devastated the crew. Ji-won attended every memorial service, standing with the volunteers who had tried so hard to save those cubs. She refused to let anyone forget that they were responsible for these lives. "We cannot save everyone," Hyun-woo told her after the 3rd funeral. "We are doing our best." "Our best is not enough if they die," Ji-won said, her voice hard. "We need to be better." The breakthrough came 6 weeks into the mission. Young-ji Kang, a foster coordinator who had organized the placement of cubs with human families, noticed something strange. Cubs that bonded closely with specific humans showed remarkable recovery. Their empathic abilities, which had made them vulnerable to trauma, now worked in reverse. They felt the love and care from their human families, and it helped them heal. One cub named Garam, who had been near death from emotional withdrawal, was placed with a human man named Ji-hoon Nam. Ji-hoon was a mechanic, rough around the edges, not particularly good with words, but he sat with Garam every night, reading technical manuals out loud in a steady, calm voice. He made sure Garam ate, helped the cub wash, and never once lost patience. After 2 weeks, Garam started responding. The cub began following Ji-hoon around, mimicking his movements, trying to help with repairs despite having no idea what anything did. When Ji-hoon laughed at Garam's clumsy attempts to hold a wrench, the cub made a sound that was unmistakably laughter too. "The cub is bonding," Daehyun reported to Ji-won. "Not just accepting care, but forming genuine family attachment. This is working." Ji-won allowed herself a moment of hope. Maybe they could do this. Maybe humanity's strange ability to love anything, even alien cubs that looked nothing like human children, was exactly what the situation needed. The Galactic Council observers were less impressed. They filed reports noting the resource expenditure, the emotional strain on humans, the deaths that had occurred. They pointed out that humans were teaching cubs to speak human languages alongside Galaxy, that human customs were being introduced, that the cubs were being contaminated with human culture. "They are children," Ji-won told the council representative who visited the Covenant. "They need love and family. We are giving them both." "You are making them into something they are not," the representative said. "They are Galaxy, not human." They are both now, Jiwan said, and there is nothing wrong with that. The message from Council headquarters arrived 3 months into the mission. 12 more colony sites had been found, abandoned facilities that previous scans had missed. Each contained between 500 and 2,000 cubs. The total number of survivors had just jumped to nearly 50,000. Jiwan read the message twice, then called an emergency meeting of all ship captains involved in the rescue. Every single one looked exhausted. They had been working beyond their limits, pouring everything they had into caring for the cubs they already had. I will not order anyone to continue, Jiwan said. We have done more than anyone expected. If we stop now, no one could blame us. Mina spoke first. How long until those cubs run out of automated supplies? 2 weeks. Maybe 3. Then we go, Mina said simply. We did not come here to save some cubs. We came to save all of them. Every captain in the meeting nodded agreement. They were tired, stretched thin, operating on willpower and coffee. But they were not going to abandon cubs to die alone in the dark. The Covenant changed course, heading toward the newly discovered sites. Behind Jiwan, through the window of the conference room, she could see cubs playing in one of the converted cargo bays. They were laughing, chasing each other, acting like children instead of traumatized survivors. That made everything worth it. 6 months after the first rescue, humanity had successfully evacuated and was caring for 48,000 Valaxi cubs. They were spread across Earth, Mars, the outer colonies, and dozens of ships that had been converted into mobile care facilities. Every major human settlement now had Valaxi cubs living among them, integrated into human families and communities. The economic impact was severe. Humanity had poured billions into the rescue effort, diverting resources from infrastructure projects, research programs, and military development. Food production had been increased dramatically to feed the cubs. Medical facilities were overwhelmed. Schools struggled to accommodate students who had different needs and learning styles than human children. But nobody suggested giving up. When polls were conducted across human space asking if the rescue should continue, 93% voted yes. The remaining 7% were mostly concerned about the financial burden. But even they admitted the cubs deserved help. Ambassador Taejin Ryu stood before the Galactic Council, presenting humanity's 6-month report. He was a diplomat trained to be calm and measured, but even he could not hide his pride in what humanity had accomplished. Every cub is now healthy and stable, Taejin said, displaying medical data on the central hologram. Mortality rates have dropped to near zero. The cubs are learning, playing, forming bonds with their foster families. By every measurable standard, this rescue operation has been a success. Counselor Vrenet rose from his seat, his reptilian face twisted in what humans had learned to recognize as disapproval. Ambassador, your report fails to mention that these cubs are being raised as humans, not as Valaxi. They speak your languages, eat your food, celebrate your holidays. You are erasing their culture. We are preserving what we can, Taejin replied calmly. We have Valaxi historical records, art, music, and literature available to every cub. They learn about their people alongside human education. But yes, they are also learning human ways because they live among humans. That is natural. It is contamination, Vrenet said. You are creating a hybrid species, neither truly Valaxi nor human. When these cubs grow up, they will be confused, lost between two worlds. Or they will be enriched by having two cultures. Taejin countered. Humans do not see diversity as contamination. We see it as strength. The debate continued for hours, with various council members expressing concerns about humanity's methods. Some accused humans of trying to create a client species, a population that would be loyal to humanity and give them more political power in the council. Others worried about the precedent being set, that other species might use this as justification for their own cross-species adoption programs. Through it all, Taejin remained calm, answering every question and addressing every concern. But he knew the real issue was not about the cubs. It was about fear. The council was afraid of what humanity represented, a species that formed emotional bonds too easily, that refused to accept logical reasons for inaction, that would sacrifice their own comfort to help strangers. Back on Earth, in a small house in Seoul, Ji-hoon-nam was teaching Garam how to fix a broken communications device. The cub was now much larger, nearly as tall as Ji-hoon when standing upright, but still had the curiosity and enthusiasm of a child. Garam's fur had regained its healthy shine, silver blue with darker patches that marked him as a male of his species. "This wire here," Ji-hoon said, pointing with a tool. "It connects the power source to the transmitter. If it breaks, nothing works." Garam leaned in close, his golden eyes studying the device intently. "Why does it break?" "Lots of reasons. Sometimes the metal gets old and weak. Sometimes someone drops the device and the wire snaps. Sometimes the connection just wears out from use." "Everything breaks eventually?" Ji-hoon smiled. "Everything physical, yes. But some things do not break. Love, family, promises. Those last." Garam looked up at him, and Ji-hoon saw something in the cub's eyes that he had not seen before. Understanding. "You promised to take care of me. That promise does not break." "Never," Ji-hoon said firmly. "That is forever." The moment was interrupted by a news alert on Ji-hoon's communication device. He picked it up and his expression darkened as he read. Garam noticed immediately, the cub's empathic senses picking up on Ji-hoon's sudden anger and worry. "What is wrong?" Garam asked. "The council is voting on whether to take you away from us," Ji-hoon said quietly. "Some of them want to put all the cubs in special facilities where you would be kept separate from humans." Garam's fur stood on end, a fear response. "They want to take me from you?" "They want to, but I will not let them." Ji-hoon put his hand on Garam's shoulder. "None of us will. You are family now. We protect family." Across human space, similar conversations were happening. Human foster parents learned about the council's intentions and were horrified. Protests began immediately. In New Shanghai, 10,000 people marched through the streets carrying signs that said, "Families not facilities and our cubs. Our choice." On Mars Colony, every single human resident signed a petition refusing to surrender their Galaxy wards. The cubs themselves reacted with fear and confusion. They had finally begun to feel safe, to trust that their human families would not abandon them, now that security was threatened. Some cubs became withdrawn again, refusing to eat or sleep. Others became aggressive, their natural strength emerging as they prepared to defend themselves. It was Garam who became the symbol that changed everything. Ji-hoon had been working late in his repair shop when he suffered a heart attack. He collapsed, unable to reach his communication device to call for help. Garam, who had been sleeping in the corner, woke immediately. The cub felt Ji-hoon's distress through his empathic senses and understood that something was terribly wrong. Garam ran outside and roared, a sound so loud and desperate that every neighbor within 2 blocks heard it. When humans came running, Garam led them to Ji-hoon and refused to leave his side until medical help arrived. The cub's quick action saved Ji-hoon's life. The entire event was captured by security cameras and went viral across the galactic network within hours. People across hundreds of worlds watched as a Galaxy cub saved his human father's life. Watched as Garam sat in the hospital waiting room with his head on his paws, whimpering until Ji-hoon was brought out of surgery. They saw the moment when Ji-hoon opened his eyes and Garam's entire body trembled with relief. "This is your contamination," a human journalist asked Vrennet during a broadcast interview. "A child who loves his father enough to save his life? A child who shows loyalty, courage, and compassion? If that is what human influence creates, then every species should want it." Vrennet had no answer. The interview ended badly for him, and public opinion across the galaxy began to shift. Many younger species, those who had joined the council more recently, started asking questions about the old protocols. Why was biological compatibility more important than emotional compatibility? Why was preserving pure culture more valuable than creating happy, healthy families? But there were still powerful voices opposed to humanity's guardianship. These voices worked behind the scenes, building a coalition of species who feared the precedent being set. They began planning ways to force the issue, to take control of the cubs whether humanity agreed or not. Taejin learned about the coalition through back channels, quiet conversations with allies in the council, who warned him that something was coming. He sent encrypted messages to Jiwon, who was now coordinating the entire rescue operation from a command station on Luna. "They are going to try to take the cubs by force," Taejin's message said. "Not through proper channels, but through direct action. You need to prepare defenses." Jiwon read the message 3 times, her jaw clenched. She had hoped it would not come to this, that reason and compassion would win, but she had been in space long enough to know that power often spoke louder than both. She called an emergency meeting of all human fleet commanders and colony leaders. "We need to prepare for the possibility of armed conflict, not with the entire council, but with factions within it. We will not fire the first shot, but we will defend our families. Does anyone disagree? Nobody did. Every commander, every leader understood what was at stake. They had spent 6 months building bonds with these cubs, creating families, promising safety. They would not break those promises no matter what the council said. The vote in the council was scheduled for 2 weeks away. It was supposed to be a review of humanity's guardianship, a chance to assess progress and make recommendations, but everyone knew it was actually a trial. If humans lost, the cubs would be taken. If humans won, they would face the anger of powerful species who hated being defied. Garam, watching news broadcasts with Ji-hoon, asked a question that no one wanted to answer. If they take us away, will you come for us? Ji-hoon looked at the cub who had saved his life, who called him Dad, who had become as much his son as any biological child could be. Yes, he said simply. We will come for you, all of us. The council chamber was filled beyond capacity. Every species had sent representatives, and the gallery seats were packed with observers from across the galaxy. This was not just about the Velaxi cubs anymore. This was about what kind of galaxy they all lived in, what values would guide the council moving forward. Judge Arbitrator Kelvin presided over the proceedings. He was ancient, belonging to a species called the Eternals, who lived for thousands of years and served as neutral judges in council disputes. His body was barely physical, more energy than matter contained in a crystalline shell that glowed with soft blue light. We are here to determine whether humanity is fit to continue guardianship of the Velaxi survivors, Kelvin said, his voice carrying a weight that commanded attention. The prosecution will present their case first. Vrenit stood, flanked by representatives from 12 other species. Your Honor, we do not question humanity's good intentions, but good intentions are not enough. These cubs are being raised in human cultures, speaking human languages, eating human food, celebrating human traditions. In 20 years, there will be no true Velaxi left, only humans with fur and claws. Humanity is committing cultural genocide through kindness. The accusation hung in the air. Tejan wanted to object immediately, but Kelvin raised a hand for silence. Continue. We propose that the cubs be transferred to preservation facilities where their native culture can be maintained. We have constructed habitats that replicate Velaxi environments. We have compiled educational materials about Velaxi history and customs. The cubs will be cared for, but in a way that preserves their true identity. Prisons, someone shouted from the gallery. Security moved to silence the disruption, but Kelvin allowed it. You describe prisons, clean, comfortable prisons, but prisons nonetheless. Vrenit's expression hardened. We describe appropriate cultural preservation. Humanity has proven they cannot raise these cubs without contaminating them. The solution is clear. Dr. Suji Bayek took the stand for the defense. She was a developmental specialist who had spent the last 6 months studying every cub in human care, compiling data that filled entire servers. She was nervous, her hands trembling slightly as she activated her presentation. Your Honor, I have tracked the development of 4,000 cubs in detail and have data on all 48,000. By every measurable standard, these cubs are thriving. Their physical health is excellent. Their cognitive development exceeds normal Velaxi baselines. Their emotional well-being scores are high and improving. But are they Velaxi? Vrenit interrupted. That is the question. They are Velaxi who are also learning human culture, Suji said firmly, her nervousness disappearing as she defended her work. They know Velaxi history. They learn Velaxi songs and stories. Many have chosen Velaxi names for themselves. But yes, they also know human culture, because they live with humans who love them. Is that contamination, or is that growth? The argument continued for hours. Vrenit presented experts who claimed the cubs would suffer identity crises. Tejan presented psychologists who said the cubs were developing healthy, integrated identities. Back and forth they went, with neither side giving ground. Then Kelvin called for the cubs themselves to testify. This was unusual, but several of the older cubs had requested the opportunity to speak. Garam was among them. The cub walked to the testimony platform with his head held high. He was nervous, his empathic senses overwhelmed by the emotions in the chamber, but Ji-hoon had taught him to be brave even when afraid. Garam looked out at the assembled council and began to speak in Valaxi, his native tongue. My name is Garam. I am Valaxi. I remember my mother's songs and my father's stories. I remember the day the sickness came and everything changed. I remember feeling them die, feeling the emptiness where they used to be. The chamber was absolutely silent. Many representatives shifted uncomfortably, confronted with the reality they had tried to ignore. Then humans came, Garam continued, switching to Korean. Ji-hoon took me to his home. I was scared and angry and hurt. I wanted my real parents, but Ji-hoon did not give up on me. He fed me when I refused to eat. He sat with me when I could not sleep. He fixed things and let me help even though I was bad at it. He taught me that family is not just blood. It is choice and love. Garam switched back to Valaxi. I am still Valaxi. I will always be Valaxi. But I'm also Ji-hoon's son. Both are true. Both are important. You want to put us in facilities to preserve Valaxi culture? Our culture died with our parents. You cannot preserve what is already gone. But you can help us build something new, something that honors where we came from while giving us a future. Several other cubs testified, each telling similar stories of loss, recovery, and new families. They spoke in both Valaxi and human languages, demonstrating that they had not forgotten their heritage, even as they embraced their present. The council was preparing to deliberate when the alarm sounded. Security alerts flashed across every display. Ships had been detected approaching the station, dozens of them, belonging to the coalition species that opposed human guardianship. They are not authorized to be here, Kelvin said, his crystalline form brightening with alarm. The lead ship broadcast a message. By authority of the coalition, we are here to take custody of the Valaxi cubs. Humanity has been judged unfit, and we are implementing immediate corrective action. The trial is not finished, Tejan objected. You have no authority. We have sufficient authority, the coalition commander replied. We are acting in the best interests of the cubs. Stand down or be fired upon. G1, monitoring from Luna Command, made a split-second decision. All human ships, defensive positions. Do not fire unless fired upon. Protect the cubs at all costs. What happened next shocked the galaxy. The coalition ships moved to dock with human stations and colonies where cubs were being sheltered. But they were not met with surrendering humans. They were met with humans and cubs together, standing side by side. On Mars Colony, when coalition soldiers tried to enter the residential sector, they found themselves facing 200 human adults and 300 Valaxi cubs. The humans held no weapons, but the cubs were growling, their considerable strength and natural claws on full display. They were not cowering victims. They were children defending their families. You will have to go through us, one human mother said, her arm around a young female cub. All of us. The soldier hesitated. His orders were to secure the cubs, but his species did not make war on children, and these cubs clearly did not want to be secured. Similar scenes played out across a dozen locations. The coalition had expected humans to fold when confronted with superior force. They had not expected the cubs to fight back, to refuse rescue, to choose their human families over cultural preservation. At the council station, Garam and several other cubs who had testified refused to leave the chamber. When coalition soldiers entered, the cubs positioned themselves between the soldiers and the human delegation. You want to take us? Garam said, his voice steady despite his fear. Then you will have to hurt us, because we are not going quietly. One soldier raised a weapon not to fire but to threaten. Garam did not flinch. I am Valaxi. Do you know what that means? We are a peaceful people. We do not fight. We do not make war. But we protect family, and these humans are our family now. The soldier looked at his commander, uncertain. The commander looked at the cubs, at their defensive postures and determined expressions, at the humans standing behind them with equal determination. He had signed up to rescue children, not to terrorize them. Stand down, the commander ordered quietly. We are not doing this. The coalition ships withdrew, their mission a failure. They had underestimated the bonds that had formed, had believed that biology would trump emotion. They were wrong. Judge Kelvin resumed the proceedings with a new understanding of what was at stake. He deliberated for 6 hours while the galaxy watched and waited. When he finally returned to the chamber, every being present held their breath. "I have reviewed all testimony and evidence," Kelvin said. "The prosecution argues that biological and cultural preservation must take precedence. The defense argues that emotional bonds and thriving children matter more. Both sides make valid points. But I must rule based on what I have witnessed today." He paused, his crystalline form pulsing. "The cubs themselves have chosen. They have declared through words and actions that they wish to remain with their human families. This council has always held that sapient beings have the right to self-determination. The cubs are sapient. They choose humanity." Vrennet shot to his feet. "They are children. They cannot make such decisions." "They are children," Kelvin agreed. "But they are children who know what they want and need. Humanity is granted full and permanent guardianship. The cubs will be raised as humans and Valaxi both, with all rights and protections that entails. This ruling establishes new precedent, the human precedent, which states that emotional bonds and proven care matter more than biological similarity in matters of guardianship." The chamber erupted in cheers and protests. Taijin felt years of tension drain from his body. Garam ran to find Jihun, who had been watching from the gallery, and threw his arms around the man who had saved him. "We won," Garam said, his voice muffled against Jihun's chest. "You won," Jihun corrected, holding the cub tight. "You stood up for yourself. I'm so proud of you." 20 years had passed since the day the Covenant first arrived at Velar Prime. The galaxy was a different place now, shaped by the choice humanity made and the precedent it established. Admiral Jiwan Park, now in her 50s with silver threading through her black hair, stood on the observation deck of the rebuilt Velar Prime orbital station. Below her, the planet had come back to life. The forest still grew thick and green. The lakes still sparkled in the sunlight, but now the cities were filled with activity again. Valaxi walked the streets, worked in offices, studied in universities, and raised their own young. But these were not the Valaxi who had died from the stellar plague. These were the cubs, now adults, who had been raised by humans and had chosen to return home to rebuild their world. They brought with them human technology, human ideas, and human customs blended with the Valaxi traditions they had learned from records and stories. Garam stood beside Jiwan, now fully grown and serving as the primary ambassador between humans and Valaxi. He was massive, standing over 2 meters tall with silver-blue fur that had darkened with age. His golden eyes still held the kindness that Jihun had nurtured in him as a cub. "It is strange to be here," Garam said, speaking in Korean out of habit, even though he was equally fluent in Valaxi. "This is my homeworld, but it does not feel like home. Earth feels like home." "That is natural," Jiwan said. "Home is where your memories are, where the people you love are. You spent your childhood on Earth. But I am rebuilding here because this is important too," Garam continued. "The Valaxi need a world. We cannot all live on Earth or Mars or the colonies. We need our own place, but we also need to maintain our connection to humanity." That connection was stronger than most people had anticipated. The Valaxi-Human Alliance had become one of the most powerful voting blocs in the Galactic Council. When the two species spoke together, others listened. They had used that influence to push for reforms, to challenge old protocols, to advocate for compassion-based policies. The human precedent, as Judge Kelvin had named it, had been invoked 47 times in 20 years. Species across the galaxy now followed the model humanity had created, forming cross-species families based on emotional bonds rather than biological compatibility. Orphaned young of 3 different species had been successfully integrated into adoptive families. The rigid barriers that once defined council society were slowly breaking down. Not everyone was happy about this. Vrennet and his coalition still existed, still argued that cultural purity mattered, that tradition should be preserved at all costs, but they were losing ground with each generation. The young across the galaxy looked at Garam and the other Valaxi, saw individuals who were happy and successful despite being raised outside their original culture, and questioned whether the old ways were really better. Inside the station, a ceremony was beginning. Today marked the official opening of the Valaxi Memorial Institute, a museum and educational center dedicated to preserving the memory of the Valaxi who had died in the plague. Jiwan and Garam made their way to the main hall where hundreds had gathered. Jihun was there, older now and moving a bit slower after his heart attack years ago, but still sharp and steady. He had retired from his repair shop and now taught engineering to young Valaxi who wanted to learn. Many of the cubs he taught called him teacher, but a few, including Garam, still called him dad. The centerpiece of the memorial was a sculpture that had taken 3 years to create. It showed 2 figures, a Valaxi adult and a human adult standing side by side with their hands joined over the head of a Valaxi cub. The inscription below read in both Valaxi and Korean, "When we were orphaned, they did not see aliens. They saw children." Hyunwoo, now the head of xenobiological studies at the Council Academy, gave the opening speech. He was gray-haired and tired, but his voice was strong. "We gather here to remember those who died, but also to celebrate those who lived. The Valaxi as they were are gone, but the Valaxi as they are continue. They are not diminished by human influence. They are enriched by it, and we humans are enriched by them." After the formal speeches, the floor opened for anyone who wished to speak. Many of the first-generation Valaxi stood and shared their stories. Some had become scientists, using their unique perspective to bridge gaps between human and alien thinking. Others were artists, creating works that blended Valaxi and human styles in ways that moved both species to tears. Some were teachers, politicians, engineers, doctors, and explorers. One young female named Bora spoke about how she had struggled with her identity as a teenager, feeling caught between 2 worlds. "I was angry for a long time," she admitted. "Angry at the plague for taking my birth parents. Angry at the council for almost taking my human parents. Angry at myself for not knowing where I belonged. But then I realized I was asking the wrong question. It is not about where I belong. It is about who I am. And I am both. I am Valaxi and I am human-raised. Both are part of me. Both matter." Her words resonated with many in the audience. Both Valaxi and members of other species who had formed cross-species families in the years since the human precedent was established. That evening, Ji-won attended a smaller private gathering at a home on the outskirts of the main settlement. It was a reunion of sorts, bringing together many of the humans who had been part of the original rescue mission. Mina was there, now running the entire logistics division for human Valaxi trade operations. Soman had become the galaxy's leading expert on cross-species nutrition. Daehyun had written the textbook on xenopsychology that every student in the Council Academy studied. They sat together, sharing a meal that included both human and Valaxi dishes, telling stories about those early chaotic days when nobody knew if the rescue would work. They laughed about mistakes they made, cried over the cubs they lost, and marveled at how much had changed. "Do you remember when Vrenit said we were committing cultural genocide?" Mina asked, shaking her head. "Now half the council wants to replicate what we did." "Not genocide," Garam said quietly. He had joined the gathering late, still wearing his formal ambassador attire. "Evolution. Cultures are not meant to be frozen in time. They grow, they change, they blend with others. That is how they stay alive. Your people would be proud of you," Ji-won said, looking at Garam with affection. "All of you. You have honored their memory while building your own future." Late that night, after the gathering ended, Garam walked with Ji-hoon through the quiet streets of the settlement. The architecture was interesting. Buildings that looked Valaxi but with human touches. Wide doorways and integrated technology that served both species equally. "Dad?" Garam said, using the Korean word he had learned as a cub. "Do you think we did the right thing? Coming back here to rebuild?" Ji-hoon was quiet for a moment, considering. "I think you are doing what the Valaxi have always done. You are caring for your people, all of them. The ones here on Velar Prime who need leadership, and the ones scattered across human space who need to know they have a homeworld to return to if they want. That is what family does. They take care of each other." "You taught me that," Garam said. "Maybe I taught you the words," Ji-hoon replied. "But you already understood it. Valaxi have always been about family and community. We humans just helped you survive long enough to remember that." They reached the memorial plaza, where the sculpture stood illuminated against the night sky. Other Valaxi were there, some praying in the traditional way, others simply standing in silent remembrance. Garam approached the sculpture and placed his hand on the carved cub's head. "Thank you," he whispered in Valaxi, "for bringing humans to us, for giving us a second chance." Far above on the orbital station, Ji-won watched the planet turn below her. She thought about the message they had received all those years ago, Morin's desperate plea for someone to save his people's children. She thought about the Council's hesitation, the protocols that almost prevented action, the species who said it could not be done. But humanity had never been good at accepting what could not be done. They had a bad habit of trying anyway, of letting their hearts overrule their heads, of forming bonds with anyone who needed love and was willing to give it. The galaxy had called it a weakness. But standing here, watching a thriving world rebuilt by the cubs humans had refused to abandon, G1 knew it was humanity's greatest strength. Her communication device beeped. A message from Earth, from the Council Liaison Office. Another species had suffered a catastrophic loss, their young left orphaned by a natural disaster. They were asking if humanity would consider helping with rescue and placement. G1 smiled and began typing her response. The answer now and always was yes. On the planet below, Galaxy cubs played in the parks their parents had once played in, learning songs in 2 languages, growing up in a world that was both old and new. They were the proof that family was not defined by biology or tradition, but by choice and love. They were the proof that when faced with the impossible, humanity would always step up, and in doing so they had changed everything.